Friday, right? People rising to get up and get out of the office, or
People rising because it's supposed
on
to be a
this
nice
Friday,
weekend.
yeah, Friday afternoon, right? Okay, welcome everyone, welcome. So I think probably Kim hopefully should be coming. Tracy's not going to be with us today, and I think Karen is not here also, but we're here.
Good to see y'all.
Yeah, good to see you. So my name is Linwood Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of Accelerate. I'm the host of this show, and I'll let everyone else go ahead and introduce themselves.
You first, Shelly.
Man, I gotta get better at this thing here. Okay, so here's my this week's introduction. So I'm Shelly Jeffcoat. All right. I'm a values and culture architect. I'm an author. I'm a YouTuber. I'm a small business owner. I'm all over the place. But most of all, I am a people riser. So I'm just excited to be here.
That's awesome.
And I am Peter Laughter here in Brooklyn, and I am really just focused on allowing companies to tell stories better and connect with the people who most matter.
Yeah, that's awesome. This show is all about people and what we need to do, you know, as individuals, and what organizations need to do, right, to really prepare and be able to compete in this modern global economy.
Yeah. And I'm excited about the conversation today because I've got questions. I've got questions.
I imagine a lot of people have questions.
A lot of questions, yes.
The labor market is confusing. That's what we're talking about today. I guess I forgot to mention that. We're talking about the labor market today. We're talking about global trends over, you know, the next decade, but we're also talking about the jobs report that came out today. I actually haven't looked at the market or any commentary on the report other than to look through Aaron's work. Today, we have Aaron Sojourner. I guess I'll go ahead and share just his thing. He'll be coming on later today. Let me show his picture. There we go.
There he is.
Let me see if I do that. No, that didn't work. So it's just an experiment. Okay, look how that didn't happen.
I like that, actually. Let's leave him there.
That didn't happen before. So anyway, we have Aaron Sojourner on. He's a labor economist, senior researcher with the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, former senior economist with the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He's going to be on a little later in the show to answer our questions. And, you know, hopefully we have people who have some questions who will, well, we know Shelly does.
Oh, I got questions. I know, especially for folks who are within the talent acquisition space or in HR, or quite frankly, anyone who's considering acquiring a new company and you want to know, I mean, I think all of us have questions about what really is happening outside of the reports, because I think for a lot of us, you go on LinkedIn and there's a whole list of what's potentially happening with layoffs, right? So we see people, and we know in certain sectors, attrition's high, but it still doesn't make sense. So he needs to make it make sense for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember Fortune 500, particularly Fortune 500 CFOs in the midst of toward the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 were in just a panic. And they kept talking about, oh my God, big tech is hiring away all my people. They're paying them up to an 80% premium of what I'm paying people. I can't compete with that. Yeah, and so I've kind of assumed as we're seeing, I think it's like people forget that the stock market is not the economy.
That's
I think
right.
people also forget that big tech is not the economy. You know, that it is a part of the economy. So, you know, these tech layoffs, which have been significant, but still pale in comparison to the huge hiring boom that happened before. But my assumption is, which I'm looking forward to clarify, is that those people have just been rehired by the places where they've been, taken from maybe at a not quite an 80% jump in salary. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting stuff. I mean, that's why we have Aaron on. So one of the things that I wanted to, that we like to do at the beginning of the show before we get out there. One, we want to encourage you to interact. Let us know you're out there. Also, let us know your questions if you have them, because we definitely will share those. But we also like to let people know what's coming up on upcoming shows. So in our first show, we got into a very interesting conversation about change and how you manage resistance to change and that kind of stuff. So this coming week, next week, we have on our show Greg Sittel. Let me share his.
Ooh.
Okay, so Greg Sittel is a speaker, innovation advisor, and he is here we go. And he is there's Kim. He's an expert in transformational change, right? So he's going to share with us some things that we can do to overcome resistance to change. It's actually a skill that you can learn. And something that, anyway, we'll be talking about next week. So just wanted to let you guys know about that. Welcome, Kim.
Welcome, Kim.
Hello, everyone. Restream did not want to be my friend today. I apologize for my tardiness.
Technology is fickle like that.
It is.
Sometimes, yes.
It is.
So I guess what I'll do is I'm going to just get the conversation started. One of the things that as I've been researching and thinking and learning about digital transformation, technology, what's going on out there, is that there's this labor crunch that is a not cyclical, meaning it's not because of a particular business cycle. It's a structural issue that is certainly, I've heard people say that it's a 20-year issue. It's certainly a 10-year issue, probably more like a 20-year issue for a few different reasons. But I came across a report that Korn Ferry did a few years ago now, so it's a little dated, but I think the kind of broad strokes of the report are still applicable. So I wanted to share just some of the things that were in that report and to kind of jump off the conversation. Let me see here if I can actually. We're almost stretching the limits of my capabilities here with the.
Okay. Hang in there, Lenwood. You're doing great.
I know. You got this.
Well, what you don't know is Aaron's like, I'm having a problem. So, but let me share this statistic. So this comes from the Korn Ferry study, and basically what they're saying is, over by the year 2030, there will be an 85 million skilled worker deficit in the 20 countries that they analyzed. And I have, there he is. And I have a slide that shows that. And the impact of this by 2030 is that, hey, Dave, sorry, the impact of that. So I'm like, the impact of that, right, is that each year I guess maybe starting with 2030, though there's potentially an $8.5 trillion in unrealized revenue because of the shortfall in workers. Which look at that and I just am like, that is just a I mean, obviously the global economy is huge, but that's still a staggering amount of money.
Yeah.
And kind of the idea that because there aren't enough skilled workers, like these opportunities are not available, it's just kind of mind blowing to me. So here are the countries that they analyzed. There were 20 countries. Like I said, this is a little old. So Russia, I mean, maybe somebody's going to get their unrealized. Somebody else going to get their unrealized revenue because obviously the situation with Ukraine, that was not going on when this report.
Is this in any order, or I mean, or is this just all of the countries that were analyzed?
That's great. That's a great question. Actually, this is all of the countries that were analyzed, but it is in an order. It is in the order of lost opportunity.
Wow.
So the United States will. I guess the easiest way to say it has the most to lose from not having the workers. I think the shortfall for the United States is, projected to be around 8 million workers. And so the economic opportunity lost, I guess is another way to say it, from not having those skilled workers is greatest for the United States. But you'll see, these are developed, some developed countries, some developing countries. All of the largest economies in the world are significantly impacted.
So, Linwood, one observation about this list that I find interesting in past roles that I've held, the company had, depending on the different functions of the organization, had hubs in some of these countries that you are seeing that are listed here in this report. And so, so for example, one of the companies that I worked for had an SMB or like a vast hub, but that was like based in another country. And so some of that skill set and talent was hiring there. Did the report talk about like the US or other countries going to places where you're seeing more of these hubs come up so that there is a higher critical mass of that type of business or work in that place versus having it more dispersed or spread out? Did the company talk about that? Because that's it's a workforce model that I've come from. I'm wondering did Korn Ferry talk about any of that or anything like adjacent to that at all? Because I think that's really interesting when you talk about the skill gap, knowing that some countries may offshore or go to these places for that talent in particular. Yeah. That's right, Shelley.
Yeah. That is a great question. That question was asked of me by an investor. I had an investor meeting and he asked the same question. And his thinking was basically the same as yours, I think, which is that, hey, if we're having a skills shortage in one country, can we go to another country, and get that skill? So, but he was actually thinking of African countries, oddly enough, which you see I think there's only one African country on here. But anyway, what they talked about in the study, well, let me back up. So all of these countries that they analyzed are expected to have a skills deficit, except India.
Wow.
Okay, and India is expected to have a surplus of about 1 million skilled workers. And one of the interesting things that they talked about was this idea of companies moving to new locations or launching operations in new locations where they might be able to find more workers, which I think is what you're talking about, Kim, right? That's what you're saying. What's interesting is, you know, when you talk about something like that, is like the countries that aren't on this list, right? The countries that haven't been analyzed, which was, I think, that investors point.
And also, Leonard, I just want to bring attention to both Dave and Craig's comments about the stretch in the workforce, and specifically manufacturing sectors. And I think that is, I mean, I'm a white collar guy and where I've been for most of my career, so that's where I tend to think. But I mean, the truth of the matter is the technical skills necessary to be a successful manufacturer or for the manufacturing workforce has gone way up as well. And I mean, for manufacturing jobs, there's a lot of people who need programming skills, and so it's going to be some interesting pressure that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a great point. That manufacturing jobs are not, it's not the manufacturing jobs of your grandfather.
That's right.
It's a whole, you know, people think, when you think about manufacturing, I know, at least for me, that's what comes to mind, right? The kind of like, you know, the blue collar and all that stuff. But increasingly, right, it's robotics and it's software and it's so much more. Oh, let me take this because you can't see Kim.
You need to work on your skill set.
Exactly. So it's so interesting that you say that, Linwood. Two things, and I would love to hear both Peter and Shelley's thoughts on it, and certainly everyone who's joining us. The first thing is, I was listening to a conversation with an author who had authored a book on sort of workforce of the future. And the question that I posed to him was, so what do I, as an HR leader, a chief people officer, right, someone who owns the organizational strategy, how am I bringing my skill set into the conversations when we want to do strategic planning around people and when we want to look at that? It's because what I'm spending my time with is talking about capabilities that people need to be successful. And he was like, Kim, that's actually very interesting you say that. Part of what I outline in this book is the need for skill force planning, not necessarily just workforce planning. And that, and where workforce planning is sort of how many people do we need to do the current jobs that we have. And when you talk about manufacturing, those jobs have evolved. It's not your current grandfather's, you know, roles or expectations. It's very different. I recently also attended a talk at Georgia Tech on climate control, and the professors and the guest of honor who were leading the conversation were talking about, you know, future areas around places like climate control, economics, and how we're now going to be looking at, building, electric vehicles. But it's not just vehicles, right? We need to think about this being public transportation. And so when you talk about manufacturing, this now gets into, well, now what are those jobs and that set of skills? And so we might not even have the skills identified yet to support whatever that workforce is going to look like. And I think that's also attributed to some of the gap that might have come out in the reporting. But I'd love to hear anybody's reaction to that or thoughts to that, because as I think about advising leaders, that's where it comes in for me, right? How do I help them think differently about the way that they look for talent, right? Or skills, should I say.
I love that. And just to pull on that thread, and as a recovering workforce planner, this is absolutely true. I was just sitting here thinking about the conversations that we used to have with leaders when we came around forecasting skills, and the challenge that even those leaders had with identifying the skills of the future. I mean, even within the business, right? Do we have the capability to identify the skills of the future? And what this report is saying is, and we missed the boat. So how do you, from a people strategy perspective, start, and I'm just thinking about where to find the talent and where you start kind of building up those skill levels that you need. I think a lot of organizations, they tend to, maybe they're looking at the intern as a talent feeder pool, but maybe you take it all the way back to high school, right? It just taking a different approach in terms of literally building out the skill sets that we need. But it starts with, you've got to actually understand what the gaps are. You got to understand what your future skill sets look like in order to support the business. I love what Dave is saying about the 2030, about the number of jobs that don't exist today. And as a mom, this is one of those things, like, as a mom, I honestly, I confess, I've been trying hard not to tell my daughter what to do. The best job is in corporate America, blah, blah, blah. Because the truth of the matter is, as we're looking at the jobs of the future, it doesn't necessarily look like what we're used to. So how do you prepare our kids for those types of futures? And then to find out that there are countries that are doing that right now. Why are we behind? Why is that the case? That's why I was like, how does this pan out in terms of the countries, and why is the United States on that list?
Well, but it also, I really wonder, are we capable of planning 10 years out? I mean, the amount of exponentially shifting technologies that are coming to bear that will start to overlap. I mean, 3D printing and construction, 3D printing and medicine, AI and medicine, AI and construction. I mean, I can't imagine where these permutations are going to go and where they'll take us, and the new business opportunities. So how are we going to plan for that? And is it really even possible?
This is great. This is an incredible conversation. I mean, you guys are touching on some just unbelievable issues. I'm gonna just self-promote for a moment. I don't normally like to do that, but I am gonna.
You've earned it, Lenwood. You've earned
it. Do it.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, Forbes released an interview with me on their Forbes Futures and Focus Visionaries podcast, where I'm asked this question, like, what are things going to look like 10 years from now? And a lot of the topics that we're talking about right now are things that some of these things I did address in that. And so I just want to encourage people.
We need to go back and watch this.
Listen to that. Listen to what I had to say on that podcast, because I can't get into all of it here, but the world in 10 years, because of these technological changes, some of which we're working on, it's going to transform, how we're doing a lot of this stuff. And the pace, the speed is really the issue. Peter's kind of smiling because Peter and I talk about this all the time. He's very well aware of the thinking on this. It's absolutely fascinating. Here's the core point that I will make is today, what we need to focus on is building, and this is kind of trite because it's said all the time, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that we have to build learning organizations because we cannot plan 10 years out. We actually need to build learning capability into the fabric of the organization, into everything that the organization does, the ability to learn.
Yeah, and I would add to that we have we need to have a multi-disciplined approach to how we view people. So a good friend of mine, Val Kirilova, former business partner, is chief people officer at a company that, like many tech companies, went through layoffs, and she had to let go of a lot of her recruiting staff. Well, that skill of recruiting, it's sales, Right. Yeah. So why is it that we don't build our workforces to be more flexible so that we can move people into different areas based on the different seasons? And I think that's going to be a big part of it is how do we retool and hold on to people in different areas and redeploy them at different times.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is like fundamental. I mean, really, really, really fundamental. Like, and it's a different approach to learning than I think traditional, when we think about like learning, historically in organizations, is like a compliance kind of learning, a compliance mindset. This is both learning for, or what I'm referring to is learning for technical, right? We do need to have the ability to upskill our people for technical problems, for technical roles. We need to be able to kind of home in-house grow those people. But increasingly, it's the adaptive challenges that are the ones that we're struggling with. Those are the challenges where we don't have an answer for those challenges. And that the kind of learning that you need for that is, some of it is skills, right? So, strategic doing, like that's 10 skills, or, communication skills, what are typically referred to as like soft skills, like those kinds of things. But it's also experimentation, right? That's learning
And
in our work. Go ahead.
And Lenwood, I think that one thing is missed in that aspect of the conversation is the importance of cultural alignment. Everyone on this call has been in a situation where we've had to do something with our work or career. We're like, oh, I don't know how to do that, and and we've overcome that lack of knowledge because of our motivation. But we've also run across things where we've said, oh, I ain't learning how to do that. Because of it was not aligned with what our values and purpose were. And so I think that's one of the things in order to have more adaptive organizations, that organizations be real clear on what is their purpose and values, and do a better job at bringing people on who are aligned with those to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that.
How do we get
Kim wants to say that.
Well,
Yeah.
I saw your face there. I was like, uh-oh,
Yes.
I hit something on Kim.
Well, I do, and I want to add to what you said, which is how do you get buy-in to curate the space for what you're talking about, Peter? Because to Linwood's point, right, there's such a level of tradition or legacy around how we view certain functions, sales, recruiting, engineering, name whatever it is, and they come with certain institutional components. How do you start to say, if you're in recruiting, you could actually go and sell? You are the first point of contact for anybody to come into an organization. They get to you even before they get to the hiring manager or the key decision maker. And so are we taking those competencies and doing enough of that organizational analysis to go, oh, this is the same. And so maybe instead of that, we can redeploy, or maybe there's a need in a different place. How do you get organizations to invest in that level of learning, but also analysis that happens so that they can truly say, this is what's going to take us into the future? So now that the recruiting function really becomes something that is of high value to the organization, because at some point those recruiters have either gone into a different role in the company and then they get pulled back out to now go in because they've increased their acumen to now go present the organization to future, whatever the need is going to be. I've yet to sort of hone that skill. I wouldn't call it a gap, but it's just something I'm interested in knowing, like how do we get better at that? How do we influence, or what's the capability we need to go, if we do this now, in 2 years we can be here. And I hesitate to go much more than 2 years because things are changing so quickly, right? But how are we doing that? Right.
I think that's right.
We should bring our guest in, but I think that I don't know how to do it, but I know the why. The companies that there will be a group of companies who do figure it out, and they will start kicking everybody else's butts. And then those who are getting their lunch money taken from them are going to be like, oh, how do you do that? And I think that's how the change is going to come. I don't think it's going to become, because I think there'll be a few visionaries who just take the lunch money of everybody else. And,
let me just go ahead and make a cryptic statement, which is this. There are companies that know how to do it.
I'm like, hold on, I'm doing it right now. So, hello.
There are some very large organizations that know how to develop that capacity.
Yeah.
And what we want to do at Accelerate with People Rising is bring those capabilities to middle market organizations. So that's kind of what I'll say on that. Let's bring Aaron in. So as I mentioned, Aaron's with the W.E. Upjohn Institute of Employment Research. He's a labor economist. He may have some. Let's bring him in, Aaron. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Nice to be here with you.
So, Aaron, have you been listening in to our conversation?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
A few
so,
minutes.
We don't want to limit. The conversation to only what happened with we're curious, obviously, about what the labor data said about the current job market, especially for, people in our audience. But, some of these questions about the skills gap and the talent crunch, because you were also, before you were focusing exclusively on your research work, you were also doing a professor of organizational design. Is that right?
I was a professor at a school of management.
Okay.
At the University of Minnesota for about 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And in the Department of Human Resources and Industrial Relations.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're well aware of some of these issues with some of the labor challenges and longer term trends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of organizations out there that have been struggling, for many years, but especially the most recent, since summer 2021, to hire and to build the teams they want and to keep the teams they want. And, their labor market's collapsed right at the beginning of the pandemic and was depressed a bit for a while. And, but it's definitely hot competition out there. It's easing a bit, like hiring rates have come down a bit since the Fed started raising rates. But you have a lot of people trying to hold on to their teams and, so it's definitely, a lot of challenges out there on the recruiting and retention and motivation side.
Aaron, you talk about how, organizations are holding on to their teams, and the Fed's trying to cool off the economy, slow hiring down. I mean, how do we get through that? Like, do we have? I mean, how? Yeah. Because don't we want the economy to grow faster so wages go up? I mean, how do we?
Right. The Fed has a really hard job. Like, we want the economy to grow quickly, and we want working people, working families want wages to go up. The business owners make a profit off the difference between sort of what people produce and what they are paid, and so there's a little bit of a tension there. Like, together we're going to bake this pie, and we want a big great pie that we make together, but then we also have to divide it up, and there's some shared interests in making the pie big and wonderful, but then there's some conflict of interest in I want a little bit bigger piece, and so the Fed wants the economy growing, but they don't want prices going up. They don't want inflation. They have a dual mandate. They want stable prices and maximum employment. So they want everybody to have a job who wants a job. They want, but they don't want prices going up. And there's some tension between that, because when when the economy is nearing full capacity, and arguably it's been at and pressing up against full capacity, although the capacity has been diminished during the pandemic, it's like the economy was sick, kind of like we couldn't do as much as we used to do. Our productive capacity globally and nationally sort of went down. So we were breaking a sweat just, jogging along. And so prices were going up because we were pushing hard against our somewhat diminished capacity. And so now supply is sort of getting back towards its prior levels as supply chains work out and, things settle into new patterns. But the Fed is definitely like a strong labor market, a big jobs report is a little bit of a mixed blessing for the Fed. And because you want people to be employed, you want wages growing. My wages are my employer's costs, and they pass those on to consumers potentially. So those are some of the tensions there. It's tough to balance.
And that's two things that I was wondering it doesn't seems to me that a lot of the inflationary pressures were from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. To what extent is rising income or rising wages a major cause? And also, is slowing the economy down in terms of interest rate hikes the only way? Wouldn't raising taxes also accomplish the same the same result with less pain to the labor market?
Yeah, those are great points. So what you've seen is that well, let me take your second point first. So yes, like we have a bunch of tools available to us from a policy perspective. Congress can raise taxes and the president can sign, and you can raise high-end taxes and like reduce demand for parts of the economy that those folks buy in.
Mega yachts.
Mega yachts.
You could reduce
real estate and assets and consumption and consumer goods, high-end consumer goods, and maybe if we have less people making those things, they can shift over to working in other pursuits that are maybe more productive to for other folks. But at this point, it's really hard to get anything through Congress, right? Like over the prior 2 years in the last Congress, there was a tremendous amount of legislation passed. Some of that was aimed at reducing inflation. Some of it was aimed at building our supply capacity, like infrastructure investments and things like that.
Manufacturing, right? There's a huge manufacturing component, right? I think something like I think I don't want to quote the wrong number.
The Chips and Science Act,
yeah,
was huge. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act was huge. The Inflation Reduction Act was huge. Like, so a lot of decisions and investments were made by Congress. But at this point, there's not much hope of getting much through Congress. So really, like, fiscal policy is kind of, in theory, you're right. But in practicality, I don't know how much taste there is for compromise and construction that way. So then we have the Fed. The Fed can act unilaterally. It can move quickly, whereas Congress, moves with more deliberation and with more veto points. So in theory, you're right, but in practice, it's like the Fed. Now, the problem is they only have. This is a little bit of a simplification, but they only have like one lever. They can like raise interest rates or lower interest rates. It's not quite true, but that's like the big thing that they have. And that is a very blunt tool for what we need. What they do is they raise interest rates, and that makes borrowing more expensive for businesses, for households. That pulls money out of the consumption side of the economy and tries to encourage people to save. But it makes a lot of like business ideas and business lines unprofitable because it raises the cost of capital. So you see sort of the economy pulling back, and it doesn't address the fundamental issues underlying things, which are the supply constraints. And it's like short-term painful, and it risks a recession. So far the economy's held very strong, and we've kind of seen everything going the way you'd like it to go, which like on path for kind of a soft landing. And this month we saw wage growth decelerate a little bit more, which the Fed wants to see. And so that's good news from the Fed's perspective. It's getting towards sort of sustainable rates. The one thing is like corporate profits, if you look like per unit value added, they're up 35% since before the pandemic.
That's a lot, isn't it?
That is a whole lot.
There's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are very upset right now.
Was it supply constraint, or was it just like I need more money for my pockets?
I think it was
yes,
both.
Yes,
right? The interaction.
I was gonna say probably both from what I've seen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like when everybody wants to buy your stuff, you want more money all the time, but when supplies shrink and your competitors can't raise production to underbid you and like outsell you, well, you can raise prices, and you can get that extra revenue and that extra markup. And so in the short run, there was this chance to jack up prices and get more revenue and boost profits. Prices, if you look from pre-pandemic to now, wage growth, compensation growth has been slower than price growth. And it's been faster for about a year, but in the last few months, actually, it's flipped again. So that wages are now growing faster than prices. But the point is that these like fattened profit margins mean that wages can grow faster than prices for a while. It can, come out. It would have to come out of profits, and organizations and owners of for-profit companies, like that doesn't make them happy. They're trying to guard their profit margins. So that's kind of, I don't know, that's a big tension right now in the economy, I think.
Does anyone else have, I have another question, but does anyone else have a question?
I was going to ask if Aaron, if you had a chance to see that prior slide where we were talking about the skills gap, and Linwood kind of broke the internet with the Korn Ferry report.
No, I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
So Linwood,
which slide is it? The one with the countries?
Yeah. The countries,
and the one before that, the number of
2030, the numbers.
Shortage.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, let me.
Well, I just wanted to get your take, Aaron, and what your thoughts were. Make it make sense for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
I think.
Go
on, Aaron. Yeah.
Well, we've seen a lot of people retire. Like we've seen a lot of like acceleration of late retirements. If you look at, there's a lot of talk about labor shortage and things like that. It's really been like older Americans who are sort of 65 and over, who maybe would be working sort of later into their life, but then they've said, especially in 2020, they said, I'm done. I'm shifting over. I don't need to be working anymore. And like millions of Americans took that path. Like if you look at the number of Americans who are not working and don't want a job, It's up
Yeah.
about 4.4 million
Yeah,
from
that was
before the
the
pandemic. And 80% of that is people over age 55, and almost all of it is people over age 65. So, we've also not had much immigration in the last 5 years. And actually, immigration is reversing. People are leaving the country, going back to their countries of origin. And so it's true that there's a shortage in some sense, but the remedy for a shortage is usually raising prices, and that elicits more supply. And that's the tension, is that employers want people to come work for them, but they want them to come work for them at the same wage they're paying everybody else, or less. And they don't want to have to raise wages so much for the new hires, because then all the people who have been working there get upset if the new people are making more, and they start to quit and disengage. So there's this like internal equity issue that, again, like companies make money on the gap between how much you contribute and how much you're paid. And if all of a sudden I need to start hiring new people and I can't do it without raising wages, if I hire that person at a higher wage, it's not just their wage that matters. It's also that everybody who's there, now I have to pay them more. And so I'm like, oh, I'd rather not bring that. I'd love to have that person. I'd love to have that person at a higher wage. But if I have to give everybody a higher wage for equity, I'd rather just stay short-staffed.
Yes.
And we're
That's
with the pay transparency laws, we're seeing
exactly
Yes.
that come to play.
Yes.
And some of these are very critical roles that
Yes.
companies probably should have elevated their folks during, other analysis or in other organizational moments, but they elected to either put that effort or energy elsewhere. Very much what you're saying, Aaron, now becomes that risk, and then it's a downstream effect of, well, now how are we going to do this? And then if we get wind of it here, how are we going to do it for these other groups? And so and risk is the word I've been noodling around in my brain as we've been talking over this last hour. Like, where do we put the risk in terms of that? And how do we even begin to perceive what the reward is for that level of investment or taking that step, right? When we acknowledge those skill forces. So I love a lot of what you just said. It's very relevant.
It's very helpful. Yeah.
Really interesting. And actually, one of the calculations, right, that I think, ends up happening then, based on what you just said, is that, for those people, right, with the high skill that the organizations need, right, they start to look at other ways, right? So gig, right, is okay. I don't have to bring this person in. I can get that work, but I don't have to hire them. The talent marketplaces and all these kinds of different mechanisms that are developing in the economy to help overcome some of these equity issues, internal equity issues. I gotta believe that there's some people who are watching this right now and some light bulbs just went off, like, okay, he's talking about something that is an issue for me. I don't know if you guys, do you still want to go back to these slides from earlier?
I got what I needed from Aaron.
That was fascinating. I've not heard anyone express that before. Maybe I'm not traveling in the right circles. I need to hang out with more economists.
Labor economists call that monopsony. So that's a monopsony model. And
monopsony model. Interesting.
Yeah, look it up. Invented by Joan Robinson back in the 1930s.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to write
I'm using that, by the way.
Same. Definitely.
A monopsony is it's like a monopoly, but where there's like only one buyer instead of one seller. And in the labor market, we think, there's a lot. It's not literally true that there's only one buyer of labor, but because jobs are so differentiated and localized often, like, even though it seems like maybe there's a lot of jobs and a lot of employers, for you, there's maybe not that many that
Yeah.
are actually a great fit.
Yeah.
And so that gives employers some market power in the labor market. So they're not just price takers. They're not just like, oh, I have to pay the competitive wage. And if I pay any more, I'll go out of business. And if I pay any less, I won't get anybody. That's kind of the competitive market, perfectly competitive market view. It's, you know, employers have some market power, some wage setting power. They have some discretion. And if they have an internal equity constraint, then you can also get underemployment, like too little employment. You have a wage. We talk about a labor shortage, but actually we have a wage shortage where the employers don't want to raise wages enough to get people off the sidelines, you know, because they can make more profits by sort of staying small, a little understaffed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
That goes back to the transparency that Peter raised.
Yep.
Amazon lost 7, but yet we look at Amazon lost $7 billion $1 billion in potential profit out of a $7 billion total profit because of attrition and inability to hire. So, I mean, that seems like a lot of money, and it seems like they could have captured a lot of that by just a small increase in salaries. The thinking to me seems a little backwards there, particularly when you talk about 35% increase in profit.
Yeah, I think, you know, managers have discretion, and sometimes they use it very well, and sometimes they're sort of haunted by sort of bad ideas and visions and, you know, heuristics. So it's hard. You know, you never know what's going to happen if I do this, exactly what's going to happen, right? As a researcher, I can stand back and I can look across thousands of firms and, you know, millions of firms and study the data. But when you're in the seat and you're making a decision, there's just you and one company, one today. Like, I don't know how much should I raise wages. That's like, if I go up, it's scary because you know, that's going to kill my profits. But on the other hand, if I don't, then I'm going to lose my team. And like, you know, I really have to balance those risks, and it's not easy. You know, it's a tough job, and you don't have, you're not playing the averages. You know, you're playing the game. It's your money there.
Yeah.
So.
Great point. You know, actually, you touched on one of these issues. If we could just get you to stay just for one more second, because what you're talking about is actually what they were talking about in this Korn Ferry thing, which is this idea of unrealized revenue. That's what they were saying, that the shortage of workers was going to get. But what you're saying, Aaron, is actually maybe there's always a little unrealized revenue, right?
Revenue, yeah, yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, the thing I'm talking about with the pay equity and all that, that's like the thing to do if you want to maximize profits, is to underproduce a little bit, underpay a little bit, and so it's not unrealized profits, but it is unrealized revenue, and it benefits the owner of the firm, but it harms the workers, it harms the consumers, it harms you know, others potentially. So yeah, in terms of the skill gap and stuff, I think we just had this big exit of the most sort of experienced folks in a lot of organizations. It's created and also the pandemic in general, like we saw this huge reshuffling of talent across organizations, right? And that was driven by a huge reshuffling in productivity of organizations. So like your corner sit down restaurant used to be very productive, but then like a big in-person dining experience stopped being productive for a long time, right? And now it's coming back. So I don't know, and you can see that in other industries.
Yeah.
This resorting is when the economics change and the productivities of different kinds of activities and organizations change, then you need to reshuffle talent across organizations. And sort of that's what we've been witnessing. And the thing to do is to invest in your people, and you can't just put up a job posting and expect that 12 of the right kind of people who just exactly meet what you want are going to show up, and you get to choose. Like, I think a lot of managers came up in a time when you didn't have to work hard on recruiting and selection and onboarding and training and development. Like you just posted openings and people came. The last few years have been different than that, and I think it's been great news for a lot of people. It's been great news for a lot of people who are marginalized in the labor market before, people who maybe wouldn't get a second look. Now employers are sort of looking harder and giving, really trying to think about what do we really need here. And one symptom of that, if you look, is that like the employment rate among people with no disability is still a little bit below what it was before the pandemic, but the employment rate for people with a disability is up, well above what it was before the pandemic. So if you're talking about like untapped talent pools, changing, like a lot of organizations invested in maximally remote, production.
Yeah.
And that sort of opens a lot of doors for people that, where doors were closed before. And that's great news.
That is great news. We're almost to the top of the hour. Aaron, we didn't get to any of your charts. I got your charts over here.
No, don't sweat it.
Maybe
Aaron
you'll
has to come back.
And give us some chart love.
Yeah, Aaron, you gotta come back.
Yeah, because I had a question about trends, Aaron, that I didn't get to ask. The nerd in me wanted to be like, speak to the trends so we know how to
do it now.
Yeah, ask your question.
Okay, well, I wanted to ask about just when you talk about like labor economics, like trends that you're seeing that help influence the way we can then, make reasonable recommendations on how to hire, at what pace or urgency, or where we're going to see, influx versus where things are going to remain flat, so that you can provide guidance all the way from startups to mature organizations.
Yeah, that's a very big question. It's hard to break it down, but it's
and you've got 2 minutes.
I know, right? In 2 minutes, how do we save the world? Go.
One thing I'll say is that, you guys were talking about like changing technology and things like that, and like how do you even plan ahead when it's so uncertain how things will be in the future and learning organizations and things like that. Like, I think the rise of these sort of chat GPT and like AI kind of stuff is a great opportunity for a lot of organizations to like rethink roles. And there's very fast social science happening here that looks like these things really can boost some workers' productivity a lot. And so like trying to think, one big opportunity I think right now is thinking through encouraging people to like experiment and figure out how to use this technology to do their jobs better. And somebody made the point that like this, because everybody has basically similar access to this technology, it doesn't usually, like big organizations have a big advantage in accessing new technologies, but here it's just like anybody with a browser can figure out how to use it. And so that's one area of opportunity. I think that like people are saying like 30% increases for certain types of tasks and jobs, like 30% increases in productivity from sort of the aid that this gives. And like, that's a huge boost. And that really, if you can figure out how to harvest that, and if you don't, somebody else is gonna eat your lunch. So like,
yeah, there's gonna be a lot of lunch eating happening for sure. Whether you'll be eating your own or somebody else.
Only by certain people, though. Yeah.
Right.
Is a bit, well, you know, you've touched on. We're out of time. We'll have to get to it another time. But you touched on a very interesting issue that was talked about in the Corn Ferry piece, which is this issue of technology and productivity. How much it will help. A lot of controversy around that, but there's also a big gap where we can get a productivity increase that was not addressed. But we'll have to talk about it another day. Thank you, Aaron, so much.
It was great to meet you all. Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show, everyone. Thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour. It's a great conversation. We'll see you next week. Greg Sattel, who will be talking about how we overcome resistance to change. Okay, we'll be talking about that next week. That's from you, Kim Blue, from the first episode. And then I went out and got Greg Sattel. Okay, we'll see everyone next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care, all.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Aaron.